And the next speaker is Professor Peter Nagy, and he comes from Budapest, and he's the scientific director and head of department at the National Institute of Oncology in Hungary. Please.
Thank you very much, and I also would like to start by thanking Ivona and Johanna for the invitation and for the opportunity to talk to you today about innovative approaches to promote equity in cancer research funding across European regions. Now, the problem of cancer burden in Europe is something that is not new to this society. We're aware of the problem, and Marek very nicely alluded into the details. But if you look at the aim of the Europe Beating Cancer Plan, which is very ambitious, and that is to have 70% average 10-year survival for European cancer patients by 2035, one thing is quite clear: we really need to deal with inequalities within cancer care and research, and we really need to take this as a priority, as you will see. You have seen this map in the previous presentation, but a key message here is that where the incidence is scattered around within European countries with no specific pattern, when you look at the mortality, the statistics looks quite sad in the Central Eastern European region compared to the Western European region, and that is what is the major cause of inequalities, we believe. What causes these inequalities? Of course, individual and collective behaviors are a major factor. Custom and social interactions linked to the exposure of cancer risk factors is important. The availability of and access to early diagnosis and screening, as we have seen in Marek's presentation, is quite clear, and the access to effective treatments also. But we really do not want to forget about disparities in cancer research, which also contribute to these inequalities largely. Now, Europe is quite good in relation to cancer research in a global scale. And we have very good scientists and nice consortial activities. We have the Europe Beating Cancer Plan, we have the Cancer Mission. There are, of course, things that need to be improved, but one key message of this slide is that patients that are treated in cancer research active hospitals have better outcomes. And that is also why we really need to deal with inequalities within cancer research and really need to map this problem very carefully. In 2021, the OECI Accreditation and Designation Board published a study where we have compared the research output of accredited comprehensive cancer centers and cancer centers. And what we saw was quite an obvious observation, I would say, that in comprehensive cancer centers you have a lot more research and there are much more research output in many aspects. But also what was really important to show was that in relation to clinical trials, the activities in comprehensive cancer centers were really dramatically higher, and patients were much better off when treated in these centers. Now, this is a little bit of an outdated map, but it clearly shows that the expectation of the EU to have at least one quality-controlled cancer center for a 5 million population is kind of true for a number of countries in the Western European countries, but in Central Eastern Europe, there are a number of countries which are lacking quality control in cancer centers, so we really need to deal with that, and I think OECI has a great deal of activities that will help this, to help filling this gap. Now, when you look at the cancer research output of the EU 25 countries, Western, Northern, Southern EU countries, as opposed to the EU 13 member countries, the gap is quite dramatic. So this is something that also gives us alert, especially if you remember the previous message that patients have much better outcomes when they're treated in cancer research-heavy hospitals. Now, the European Academy of Cancer Sciences were instrumental in shaping the cancer research continuum towards the way of the Cancer Mission, and even today. And there were a number of conferences called the GAGO conferences, where the subject of inequalities started to be discussed. And apparently, later on, at the Vatican conferences, the latest one, dedicated its topic to strategies to decrease inequalities in cancer therapeutics, care, and prevention. All of these were published. You can find them online. They're all available mostly in molecular oncology. But what was really important is that it was the first two GAGO conferences where we started to discuss about the importance of involving Central and Eastern European cancer centers in larger EU consortial activities like CancerCo Europe. Because as has been raised yesterday, in Latvia, for example, or in Estonia, it was said that it's much more difficult to have patients enrolled in clinical trial activities. And if we have large consortial programs within EU where the Central Eastern European countries have no place, then it will be an even larger problem. So we really need to find a way to include smaller and Central Eastern European countries into these consortial activities. So it was at the first Vatican conference when the idea were raised that perhaps we could fill this gap by generating twinning partnerships. And throughout the years, there were 3 twinning partnerships that were established, one between Athens and DKFZ, one between our institution, NIO, and the Karolinska Institution, and one between Warsaw and Paris. As far as I can tell, the first 2 are quite active, and based on the work in the program that I will allude into next, the third one is not that active anymore. But I would like to give you a good example of our experience. We, in fact, signed a bilateral treaty with Karolinska, and to show that this is not just an MOU that was signed between the 2 institutions, we have a lot of activities, including we established a laboratory for this gentleman called Professor Elias Arner, who is the director of cancer research KI. He has a very active research group there now, very successful as well. And just a couple of weeks ago, there was a very successful radiotherapy workshop organized by the 2 institutions in Budapest, which had very good echoes later on. So this is a program which is called the UNCAN EU, because I was supposed to talk about innovative approaches to promote equity in cancer research. And this is an important program to be mentioned here. So the program started with a coordination and support action, kicked out in September 1st in 2022. It's called for UNCAN EU. The idea here was to create a road to a European Federated Cancer Research Data Hub throughout the utilization of different use cases with the involvement of patients, patient advocates, and citizens. And importantly, it was also trying to address inequalities within cancer research. This program is going to allude into the UNCAN EU. We have the blueprint, and I will talk to you a little bit about that. So this initial phase was a duration of 15 months. We had 29 core partners from 20 different countries with a funding of 3 million euros. It was led by INSERM, Elix Solari, fantastic organization. And the idea, the aim, and some of the activities, also the pathway was published in these 2 papers, if you're interested. These were papers in Cancer Discovery by invitation, showing that also the American colleagues are interested in this program. I need to focus on inequalities, and the work package that focused on inequalities was work package 6. It was led by my institution, and the overall aim was to identify mechanisms that may boost cancer research and innovation potential in lower income regions across Europe, while also promoting technology transfer and interaction with private companies. We had 4 different tasks, sorry. The first task was led by IARC, and their work was to map cancer specificities across European countries. The second task was led by us and the OECI. It was benchmarking existing research infrastructures and networks across Europe. The third task was led by the DKFZ and dedicated to benchmark and promote the twinning programs that I mentioned to you, and to try to establish more twinning activities throughout Europe, including and involving Central Eastern European centers. And the fourth task was led by the NKI and the ONCODE Institute, dedicated to technology transfer activities. This was also shown by Marek, and this is a work also done by IARC in relation to the project. This was demonstrating that if you compare overall mortality in all cancers and in the case of lung cancer, for example. And if you compare the overall mortality rate of individuals with higher education shown by the open circles, there are not much differences throughout Europe. But when you take into account the lower educated people, so the differences in socioeconomic terms, then the difference starts to be quite visible. So we really need to do something about that. The second task demonstrated that newly diagnosed and managed patients around Europe in the different cancer centers, in OECI-accredited cancer centers, were not much different and show no specific region specificities. But when you look at the number of patients in clinical trials, Central Eastern Europe was not performing as well as the other regions. Also, when you look at the number of PIs and postdocs, Central Eastern European had a problem with the low numbers. But more strikingly, when we looked at the molecular tumor boards, the presence of molecular tumor boards and technology transfer offices, with the light blue bars, you can see that in many Central Eastern European countries, they're just non-existing, which is a major problem. And then when you look at the value of cancer research grants and the expenditures on cancer research, again, you can see a big difference in Central Eastern Europe compared to the other regions. And lastly, if you look at the output, it correlates well with the previous slide that I've shown you. Central Eastern Europe has a problem there too. With regard to task 3, looking at twinning activities, the major message here was that twinning is a good model to address inequalities and to rise pan-European collaboration within Europe, and it faces a number of challenges, including sustainability and specific designated funding. So that's something that we recommend to look into. And of course, one of the very important tasks was to look into technology transfer, and as I've shown, this is something where Central Eastern Europe is really lagging a lot behind. There are only very low amount of diagnostic procedures or new drugs that are coming from research from the Central Eastern European region. And that is mainly because of the lack of technology transfer activities and lack of funding to technology transfer activities. Basic research can be relatively strong, but the technology transfer is always the major hurdle. So we had recommendations at the end, how to fill these gaps, and in the blueprint, these were the 4 most important recommendations in relation to addressing inequalities. And the first one, as you can see, is to do something about socioeconomic inequalities. They have to be better evaluated across Europe. And we also said that in the Uncanny EU network, we should promote team science approaches, including at least 1 widening member states in every 5 participating member states in the use cases that are going to be announced in the new calls. We also suggested that the twinning activities needs to be promoted because they're good infrastructures, good programs to address inequalities. And of course, technology transfer is something that we really need to look into very closely, not only in Central Eastern Europe, but also in some Western European countries. So the Uncanny EU calls are now out, 2 of them. And unfortunately, I need to emphasize that none of the recommendations that we articulated in the blueprint were implemented in the calls, which calls for an alert because we really need to deal with inequalities, but this is not a requirement at present. So we really need to have the proposals structured in a way that will consider these recommendations. And then I will give you a national good example, coming back to Simon's questions, because the countries need to do something about that, not just Europe. Isn't that true? So in Hungary, the government recognized that cancer research is, not just cancer research, innovation does not receive enough funding. And for a long time, we were relying on very slim funding opportunities. But a few years back, major programs were announced, including, for example, the thematic excellence programs, and this other one called Investing in the Future. And our institution were quite successful in these programs, and we received a number of grants which really made a difference in our scientific activities. But most importantly, this program should be mentioned, which is called the National Laboratories Program. The program is designed to generate knowledge centers that can become scientific hubs in areas with high potential to boost the national economy and have real visibility on the international scale. So initially there were 18 of these laboratories that were established, and later on it was expanded to 26. Only one is dedicated to cancer research, which is at our institution led by the NIO. And we're proud to say that we're among the excellent achieving laboratories. This is substantial funding, which really gives a boost to scientific activities at the NIO. It has 3 different sub-programs. The first one is dedicated to establish a national complex oncology database. The second one is dedicated to innovative therapies, and the third one is implementation of new therapeutic strategies to the clinical practice. The program is going really well. We have a number of results, just a few of them. We now have a centralized tumor bank system at the institution. We established an oncology database with organized data storage, including the National Cancer Registry, which was completely restructured as a result of this program. We have validated new diagnostic protocols. We established a national molecular tumor board. We have new molecular-based tumor classification programs. We have international and national drug development programs. We have patent startups, and we established a technology transfer mechanism within the institution. And we started to cooperate more and more with industry. The results are visible on scientific output as well. This is just a national laboratory program output, and we also put extra emphasis on involving young students and young researchers to the program. As a result of these activities, I need to say that the basic science were strengthened a lot at our institution. We have new basic research groups, we have new directions in basic cancer research, and we have an increasing number of papers with first and last authors in very influential scientific journals. The same thing is true for clinical science, where we have an ever-increasing number of clinical trials. Most of them, or an increasing number of them, are led by individuals from the center, publishing in really prominent journals, including a cover page in Lancet Oncology. And this is something I need to point out. With the epidemiological research, we also made a difference. With IARC, we started a program where we first reconcile the database of the National Cancer Registry, the DEST Registry, and the Health Insurance Fund. We have now a very reliable database which allows us to do real outcomes research activities. I don't want to brag, but this has been recognized nationally. And I say that to show that if you put money into the system, you can really make a difference, and the results are coming. So for that reason, I guess it's important for the EU to engage in these activities and support Central Eastern European science a little better. Of course, you have these programs, we participate in all of them, but these are mostly policy-making and policy-related programs, and nothing is related to actual cancer research activities. So I would like to leave you with the message that we really need to have dedicated programs which in one way or another helps cancer research in the Central Eastern European region. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. The surplus shows how it was, how the presentation was great. If I can start with questions, very simple, coming back to your recommendation. I know that it was refused some recommendation. Perhaps recommendation to reduce bureaucracy around research is present.
Absolutely.
There a recommendation in place?
Reduce bureaucracy. In Europe, it's a big problem. I can see that. But it's not just, it's not an inequality issue, because everyone has to face that. In Central Eastern Europe and in Western Europe, the bureaucracy is kind of the same. I think what we need to do is to try and ways and mechanisms how we can start working together and how we can start including those countries and those Central Eastern European centers into the pan-European activities.
Thank you. Yes, we have questions. Yes, please.
Working? Oh, perfect. Thank you very much for the presentation. So that was very interesting. I have a question about the Central European states and also Malta, Cyprus, and the other smaller states. You showed the discrepancy in terms of, sorry, there is a delay, so that's difficult to speak. So I have a question about the situation of those countries. I know that some of them have participated in the UNCAN study, if you can say more about that, and if you think that we should look at small member states specifically and not only on Eastern Europe.
I fully agree. And when we're talking about Europe here, I just mentioned Central Eastern Europe because that is the problematic area in a global term. But of course, we need to look into smaller states as well and need to make sure that they're included in these programs. We have very nice examples. For example, Latvia, a small country, has shown that if they really do coordinated actions and with the help of EU initiatives, you can really make a difference in these countries. And I fully support that. They need to be included in these programs as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for the last questions. Gennaro?
Thank you very much. And I have a question for you, but also for Giovanni Apollone, who would like to get his attention. So you made a very strong case about the twinning programs. So I wonder whether OSCI can help with this. For example, I know that OSCI has a very strong budget, can dedicate a small budget for the next years to piloting projects in this way. It has also a map of the institutes which is less developed, which is more developed, and can in some way already foster specific twinning programs. This is my suggestion.
Thank you very much for that suggestion. All I can say is that based on the example of the National Institute of Oncology in Hungary and the Karolinska Institution, where this twinning activity is based solely on funding that is coming from the two institutions, so no external funding at all, we can say that regardless of this fact, there is great results. And not only Hungary is happy, but also the Karolinska is happy. And they also can learn from the Hungarian examples. And major stakeholders, decision makers are engaged in this process. It's fantastic, but sustainability is a real problem. So we really need to find a way to fund these activities. I'm not sure if OSCI is the right one. This is something that needs to be discussed in the board. But one thing is for sure is that this activity is working and it delivers results. I can tell you that.
Because we are a little bit ahead of the schedule, so and we have still two very important presentation. We just need to move forward. I'm really very sorry. However, it's because at 1 we have lunch, and during lunch we can be able also to reach our speakers.